What if the people sworn to uncover truth were the ones caught in a web of troubling secrets? Day 14 of the Karen Red trial didn't just present evidence. It unleashed a firestorm of controversy that could redefine this entire case. Prepare for revelations that challenge everything you thought you knew, as the once clear lines of a homicide investigation began to blur into a disquieting haze of doubt and suspicion. The day's proceedings promised to peel back layers of the official story, and what lay beneath was more alarming than many could have imagined. The courtroom crackled with tension as defense attorney Alan Jackson zeroed in on Sergeant Yuri Buchinik, a key figure from the Massachusetts State Police. The subject, John O'Keefe's ring camera footage, a silent witness that could hold vital clues. The prosecution had previously insinuated that Karen Red might have had the opportunity and motive to tamper with these digital eyes. But Jackson, methodical and relentless, began to dismantle that insinuation piece by piece. He pressed Buchinik, cornering him until the sergeant had to concede a crucial point. There was absolutely zero verifiable evidence, no digital fingerprint, no login record, no trace whatsoever, that Karen Red had ever accessed, let alone deleted or altered, the videos from O'Keefe's home security system. The air in the courtroom grew thick with unspoken questions. If Red hadn't touched it, who had? Then came the twist, a revelation that sent a murmur through the gallery. It was admitted that troopers from the Massachusetts State Police, specifically Trooper Michael Proctor and Trooper Deco, had indeed accessed the ring footage. They hadn't just reviewed it. They had delved into it directly from John O'Keefe's phone, navigating the app itself. Furthermore, the state police had gone so far as to obtain a warrant served directly to Ring, compelling the company to turn over its internal activity logs, the very data that would show every interaction with O'Keefe's account. The revelation was stark. While Karen Red was demonstrably kept out of this digital domain, investigators were deeply embedded within it. This begged an unsettling question. What were they so meticulously searching for? Or, perhaps more disturbingly, what were they ensuring stayed buried, far from the prying eyes of the defense and, ultimately, the jury? But the questions swirling around digital evidence were just the beginning. The courtroom was about to hear the kind of crude, unprofessional shop talk that has no conceivable place in the solemn duty of a murder investigation, let alone from those leading it. The focus then shifted to a series of text messages that would paint a damning portrait of investigator conduct. These weren't just casual exchanges, they were messages between Trooper Michael Proctor, a lead investigator in O'Keefe's death, and his direct supervisor, Sergeant Buchinik, sent while Proctor was actively examining Karen Red's personal phone. The content, read aloud, was deeply troubling. Proctor had texted Buchinik with comments like, "No nudes so far," a shockingly inappropriate and objectifying remark made while searching the phone of a woman who would soon be accused of EOR. Other derogatory comments attributed to Proctor about Reed further illustrated a disturbing lack of impartiality and professionalism, hinting at a mindset tainted by contempt rather than a dispassionate pursuit of facts. And Sergeant Buchinik's role wasn't merely that of a passive recipient. He had acknowledged one of Proctor's inappropriate messages with a thumbs-up emoji, an apparent endorsement of the unprofessional tone. Reports from journalists inside the courtroom described jurors reacting with visible disgust and even anger as these texts were revealed. The atmosphere was charged, the sense of impropriety palpable. Yet, in a moment that seemed to defy the raw evidence just presented, Sergeant Buchinik, under oath, made an astounding claim. He still believed that Trooper Proctor had handled the sensitive investigation with integrity. The word integrity hung heavy in the air, a stark and jarring contrast to the crude and biased sentiments exposed in Proctor's own words. It was a defense of his subordinate that many found difficult to reconcile with the day's revelations. As the shockwaves from this particular exposure of investigator conduct began to settle, the trial took another dramatic turn. Newly unveiled video footage dramatically shifted the focus, casting a harsh and suspicious spotlight onto another key figure present during those fateful early morning hours and his inexplicable late-night activities. The courtroom was then presented with explosive, previously unreleased surveillance footage. This was not just any footage. It captured Federal Agent Brian Higgins at the Canton Police Department headquarters around 1:30 a.m. on January 29th. The timing was critical. This was after he had been out drinking, after his visit to the Waterfall Bar and Grill, and, crucially, after he had been present at 34 Fairview Avenue, the very location where John O'Keefe's body would later be discovered in the snow. The prosecution had entered these videos into evidence, perhaps intending to clarify Higgins' movements, but they seemed to only deepen the enigma surrounding him. Multiple camera angles provided a chillingly silent narrative. Higgins's dark-colored Jeep, reportedly equipped with a plow, was seen pulling into the police department parking lot. He then exited his vehicle and walked purposefully towards the building, entering the station. The cameras tracked him as he moved down a hallway and then disappeared into an office. And then, the video feed presented its most baffling element: a critical, inexplicable 6-minute void in the footage. The time stamp on the surveillance recording abruptly leaped from 1:29 a.m. to 1:34 a.m. 6 minutes, gone, unrecorded, unseen. The courtroom was left to ponder the significance of this gap. Rumors are now swirling furiously online and in legal circles. One might observe. Was this a simple technical hiccup? Perhaps a glitch with a motion-activated camera system that failed to detect movement? Or, as some are now openly speculating, did something occur during those missing 6 minutes that someone, for some reason, did not want recorded? Where was Brian Higgins during that unrecorded interval? And what exactly was he doing inside the Canton Police Department, shielded from the camera's gaze in the dead of night? The mystery was palpable, and the intrigue only deepened when the cameras resumed their silent watch, capturing Higgins engaged in a series of bizarre behaviors that his own subsequent explanations have struggled and failed to convincingly reconcile. When the Canton Police Department surveillance cameras flickered back to life after that 6-minute blank, the footage of Brian Higgins in the parking lot became even more perplexing. He wasn't simply getting back into his Jeep and leaving. Instead, he was seen pacing, almost agitatedly, his silhouette illuminated by the cold parking lot lights. He was constantly on his phone, the screen casting a faint glow on his face as he appeared to be engaged in intense communication. Then, the truly peculiar and arguably most suspicious activity unfolded. Higgins was observed systematically approaching several parked cars, not his own, and trying their doors. He was seen successfully opening the doors of some of these vehicles and peering inside, as if searching for something or someone. This strange parking lot ballet stood in stark contrast to the explanations Higgins himself had provided for his late-night visit to the police station. Initially, it's understood he told authorities he was there to do administrative work, a vague explanation for a 1:30 a.m. visit. Later, his story reportedly evolved. He then claimed he had inadvertently left a key to a surveillance vehicle on a desk inside the station and had returned to retrieve it. As part of this revised narrative, he suggested he was merely repositioning some vehicles in the lot to allow for snowplowing operations. However, the video evidence presented seemed to tell a different, more disquieting story. The methodical checking of multiple, apparently random cars, coupled with his intense phone activity, painted a picture far more complex and, frankly, more suspicious than simply shuffling cars to make way for a plow. What was he truly searching for in those vehicles? Who was he communicating with so urgently in the dead of night? These deeply unsettling questions about Higgins' conduct naturally prompted the defense to scrutinize the close-knit, almost incestuous-seeming ties between the investigators on O'Keefe's case and other individuals who were at 34 Fairview that night, only to be met by an unexpected judicial wall. The defense, led by Alan Jackson, clearly aimed to demonstrate to the jury that Trooper Michael Proctor's connection to the Albert family, owners of 34 Fairview Avenue and central figures in the case, was not merely a casual acquaintance but a deep, personal, and potentially compromising entanglement. Jackson sought to introduce evidence that could paint a picture of bias, suggesting Proctor might have been too close to the Alberts to conduct an impartial investigation. Among the evidence the defense wanted to present were text messages reportedly, indicating that Julie Albert, wife of Chris Albert and sister of Brian Albert who lived at 34 Fairview, had babysat for Trooper Proctor's children. Even more suggestive of a close bond, reports mentioned a social media post, allegedly made by Proctor's own mother, in which she lovingly referred to the Albert family as their second family. Such a familial connection would starkly contradict the image of a detached, objective investigator. This line of inquiry was critical because Sergeant Buchinik had previously testified that Proctor had assured him he knew the Alberts but didn't really know them personally, that there were no close ties and therefore no conflict of interest that would prevent him from investigating them thoroughly and fairly. The defense aimed to shatter this assertion. However, during a voir dire, a hearing outside the jury's presence to determine the admissibility of evidence, the judge delivered a significant blow to the defense's strategy. Judge Beverly Canone ruled that this specific evidence concerning Julie Albert's alleged babysitting and Proctor's mother's second family comment could not be introduced through Sergeant Buchinik. The reasoning: Buchinik lacked direct first-hand knowledge of these specific social media posts or private babysitting arrangements. While the ruling was legally sound based on hearsay rules, it effectively kept a potentially crucial piece of context regarding investigator bias from the jury, at least through this particular witness. Though one path to exposing potential bias was momentarily blocked, the defense swiftly pivoted, preparing to expose an astonishing and arguably more professionally damaging gap in the lead investigator's knowledge of his own case's fundamental evidence. The courtroom proceedings then saw the prosecution, on redirect examination, attempting to rehabilitate Sergeant Buchinik and solidify their narrative that the investigation had been thorough and had correctly focused on Karen Red. Through Buchinik, Assistant District Attorney Adam Lally sought to convey that investigators had found no credible reason to suspect anyone else in John O'Keefe's death. During this line of questioning, Buchinik made a bold and definitive statement. There was, he claimed, no evidence John O'Keefe ever went in the house at 34 Fairview. This assertion was a cornerstone of the prosecution's theory that O'Keefe had been struck by Red's vehicle and left outside in the snow, never making it inside the Albert home. However, on recross-examination, Alan Jackson delivered a stunning counterpunch. He confronted Sergeant Buchinik with a monumental piece of defense evidence, something that had been discussed extensively in pretrial hearings and media reports: forensic data extracted from John O'Keefe's own cell phone. This data reportedly showed that O'Keefe's phone had registered movement, taking steps that covered a distance of approximately 82 feet, after his arrival at 34 Fairview Avenue in the early hours of January 29th. This 82-foot journey strongly suggested that O'Keefe was mobile and moving around, potentially inside the house or on the property, directly contradicting Buchinik's claim and challenging the prosecution's entire timeline and theory of the case. The true bombshell, however, was Buchinik's response. When faced with this critical piece of digital forensic evidence, Sergeant Buchinik, a lead investigator responsible for uncovering the truth in this complex homicide case, claimed he was unaware of this 82-foot movement data from O'Keefe's phone. A palpable sense of disbelief rippled through the courtroom. How could a senior investigator, spearheading such a high-profile case, be oblivious to such a pivotal piece of information generated by the victim's own device, information that fundamentally challenged the official narrative? The implications were staggering. Was it a case of shocking incompetence, a failure to review all available evidence? Or was it something more deliberate, a convenient blind spot in an investigation that seemed increasingly determined to focus on a single suspect, regardless of contradictory data? This glaring evidentiary oversight was compounded by other oddities surrounding the official inquiry, particularly concerning the behavior of a key federal agent witness, Brian Higgins. The defense then turned its attention to another peculiar aspect of the investigation, the circumstances surrounding the initial interview of Brian Higgins. Higgins, a federal ATF agent, was not just a witness. He was someone with purported connections to local law enforcement and many individuals involved in the case. Alan Jackson meticulously highlighted the context of this interview. Higgins was not being treated as a suspect at that time. He was not under arrest, nor was he in custody. He had not even been read his Miranda rights, procedures typically reserved for individuals whose liberty is being curtailed. He was, ostensibly, just a witness being asked to provide information. Yet, despite this non-custodial, witness-centric context, Brian Higgins made a request that stood out as exceptionally cautious, if not outright defensive. He insisted on having his lawyer present during the interview. While every individual possesses the right to counsel, Jackson emphasized the unusual nature of this demand given the specific circumstances. In a case environment where many individuals were supposedly friends, or at least close colleagues within the law enforcement community, Higgins's immediate call for legal armor was conspicuous. Why such a formal, legally shielded approach for what was framed as a routine witness statement, especially from a fellow law enforcement officer? Reports from those following the case closely claimed this raised significant eyebrows. Did Higgins have something to hide? Was he anticipating the direction the investigation should have been heading, or was he concerned about his own potential exposure? His pronounced caution spoke volumes, adding another layer of suspicion to his already enigmatic role in the night's events. As Sergeant Buchinik's marathon, multi-day testimony finally prepared to draw to a close, the courtroom was left to grapple with a case that seemed to be unraveling the investigation itself, revealing far more uncomfortable questions than providing clear answers. Day 14 of the Karen Reed trial wasn't just another procedural day in court. It was a cascade of bombshells that have irrevocably altered the landscape of this case. We've witnessed the ugly underbelly of an investigation, with investigator misconduct laid bare through vile and unprofessional text messages. We've been confronted with suspicious new surveillance footage of Brian Higgins, a federal agent whose late-night activities at the Canton Police Department are now fraught with inexplicable missing time and bizarre, unaccounted-for actions. We've heard a lead investigator, Sergeant Yuri Buchinik, admit under oath his shocking ignorance of crucial defense evidence, the 82 feet of movement registered by the victim's own phone. And we've seen judicial rulings that, while legally framed, have limited the jury's exposure to the full extent of potential conflicts of interest and biases among those tasked with finding the truth. The once seemingly straightforward narrative, pushed by the prosecution, that John O'Keefe's tragic death was a direct result of Karen Reed's actions, is now deeply mired in doubt. This doubt isn't just about Reed's guilt or innocence anymore. It's about the very integrity and competence of the investigation itself. A disturbing picture is emerging, one of a potentially flawed, demonstrably biased, and at times shockingly unprofessional inquiry. The question that now hangs heavy over these proceedings is no longer simple. Is this pursuit of justice truly on course, or are we witnessing a desperate scramble to preserve a flawed narrative, a scramble to protect reputations, and, perhaps, to conceal a truth far darker and more complex than anyone initially imagined? With so much already exposed, with so many cracks appearing in the official story, one can only brace for what other shocking secrets lie buried, still waiting to erupt in this extraordinary and deeply troubling case,